The moon is high and the stories are heating up here at Raven's Library. Whether you're a lone wolf or watching with friends, you are part of this pack now. And I am so excited to dive into today's chapter with you. Now, let's get into the story. The dagger tucked inside Aurora's boot was the only thing keeping her steady. Tonight, the blood moon mating ceremony was supposed to be a celebration of unity, a night where wolves found their fated halves. But for Aurora Conan, it was a hunting ground. She hadn't come to find a mate. She had come to escape one. 5 years ago, the Alpha King, Damon Gonzalo, had burned her village to ash and executed her father in the town square. He had stolen her future. Tonight, she would steal it back. Her plan was simple: attend the mandatory ball, feign illness, and slip across the border while the guards were distracted by the mating frenzy. But the moon goddess was cruel, and fate was about to play a joke that would cost Aurora her soul. Chapter 1. The music in the great hall was too loud, a thrumming vibration of strings that seemed to mock the pounding of Aurora's heart. She moved through the crush of bodies, her senses assaulted by the thick, cloying cocktail of perfumes, sweat, and the primal pheromones of 500 shifting wolves. To anyone watching, she was just another she-wolf from the conquered northern territories, dressed in a faded silk gown that had seen better days, her eyes cast down in submission. But beneath the silk, her muscles were coiled tight as a spring. Aurora didn't grab a flute of champagne from the passing trays. She didn't look at the unmated males who tracked her movement with hungry, glowing eyes. She kept her gaze on the service exit, hidden behind a tapestry of the first Lycan king. 30 feet. 20 feet. If she could just slip behind the velvet curtain, the tunnel would lead her straight to the stables where a horse was saddled and waiting.
"Careful, little wolf."
A voice slurred, a heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder, halting her progress. Aurora froze, her fingers twitching toward the hidden blade in her boot. She forced herself to breathe, turning slowly to face a burly beta from the southern pack. His eyes were glazed with lust and wine. "You're in my way," Aurora said, her voice low and devoid of the fear he clearly wanted to smell.
"Feisty,"
the beta grinned, leaning in close enough that she could smell the sour ale on his breath.
"I like feisty. Have you felt the pull yet? Maybe the goddess made you for me."
"I'd rather be made for a corpse," she snapped, stepping back. Before the beta could retaliate, the heavy oak doors at the entrance of the hall slammed open with a sound like a thunderclap. The orchestra screeched to a halt, the laughter died. A hush fell over the room, instantaneous and terrified, as the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Aurora used the distraction to twist away from the beta, taking 2 steps toward the exit. But then it hit her. It wasn't a sound, it was a scent. It rolled over her like a tidal wave, a dark, intoxicating mixture of rain-soaked earth, burning cedar, and something metallic, like blood on a sword. It filled her lungs, choking out the stale air of the ballroom. Her wolf, usually dormant and filled with grief, suddenly woke up, thrashing against her ribcage, howling a single word that shattered Aurora's entire world. "Mate." Aurora stumbled, her hand clutching her chest. No, it wasn't possible. She turned against her will, her body betraying her mind, her eyes locking onto the figure standing at the top of the grand staircase. He was massive, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the empire he had built on bones. His black hair was swept back, and his tuxedo did nothing to hide the lethal predator underneath. Alpha King Damon, the man who had killed her father, and as he stood there, surveying his subjects with cold indifference, his head suddenly snapped to the side. His golden eyes flared, burning brighter than the chandeliers, and locked directly onto Aurora's face across the crowded room. Chapter 2. The connection was physical, a tether of lightning that snapped into place between them, pulling Aurora toward him with a force stronger than gravity. She gasped, grabbing the edge of a banquet table to keep from falling to her knees. This was a mistake. This was a nightmare. King Damon didn't move like a man. He moved like a shadow, detached from the wall. He descended the stairs, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea, wolves bowing their heads and exposing their necks in instinctive submission to the alpha of alphas. Aurora couldn't bow. She couldn't move. She was frozen in a paralysis of horror. Her wolf was whimpering, desperate to run to him, to bare her throat and let him claim her. Her mind was screaming at her to run, to draw the dagger, to do something. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. Up close, he was terrifying. The scar that ran through his eyebrow gave him a permanent scowl, and the power radiating off him made the air shimmer. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the guards. He only looked at her. "What is your name?" His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and straight into her bones. Aurora clenched her jaw so hard her teeth ached. She fought the urge to answer, fought the alpha command lacing his tone. "Aurora," she whispered, the name torn from her throat against her will. Damon inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. A look of dark possessiveness crossed his face, erasing the cold mask of the king. He reached out, his large hand hovering inches from her cheek. "Mine," he growled. It wasn't a question. It was a decree. The word echoed through the silent hall. The crowd gasped. The king had found his queen. The spell broke. The sheer audacity of his claim, the man who had murdered her family now daring to claim ownership of her heart, ignited a rage so hot it burned away the fear. Aurora slapped his hand away. The sound of flesh striking flesh rang out like a pistol shot. "I reject you," she hissed, her voice shaking with fury, loud enough for every wolf in the hall to hear. "I, Aurora Conan, reject you, Damon Gonzalo, as my mate." The silence that followed was deafening. Wolves stared with mouths open. No one rejected the Alpha King. It was a death sentence. Damon didn't flinch. He didn't roar. He didn't strike her. Instead, a slow, terrifying smirk curled the corner of his lip. The gold in his eyes darkened to molten lava. "You can try," he said softly, terrifyingly calm. "But the bond does not care for your politics, Aurora." He stepped forward, closing the distance. Before she could draw her knife, he swept her up into his arms, bridal style. She shrieked, hammering her fists against his chest, but it was like hitting a stone wall. "Put me down! I rejected you!" she screamed as he turned and began walking back toward the stairs, carrying her away from the exit, away from her freedom. "Guard the doors," Damon ordered over his shoulder, his voice ice cold. "Let no one leave. The ceremony is over. I have what I came for." Chapter 3. The journey to the royal wing was a blur of stone corridors and terrified servants pressing themselves against the walls to avoid the king's wrath. Aurora fought him every step of the way, but Damon held her effortlessly, his grip iron tight, though careful not to bruise. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. He simply carried her like a prize he had won at war. He kicked open the double doors to the royal suite and deposited her onto the massive four-poster bed. Aurora scrambled backward, crab-walking across the silk sheets until her back hit the headboard. "Don't touch me," she warned, breathless, her hand finally reaching for the boot where her dagger was hidden. Damon stood at the foot of the bed, loosening his tie. He watched her fumble for the weapon, his expression unreadable.
You intend to stab me on our mating night, Aurora? It's hardly traditional.
I am not your mate, she spat, pulling the blade free. It looked pitifully small against a man of his size. I am your enemy. You killed my father. The amusement vanished from his face. For a second, something like pain flickered in his golden eyes, but he walled it off instantly. I killed a rebel leader in a time of war. Do not confuse justice with murder. Get out! She screamed, pointing the trembling blade at his chest. Damon sighed, a heavy, weary sound. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, though the predator in his stance remained. I will not force you, Aurora. The bond demands I claim you, but I am not the monster you believe me to be. I can wait. He turned and walked toward the door. Aurora didn't lower the knife. She watched him with wild eyes, waiting for the trick. Damon paused at the threshold, his hand on the brass knob. He didn't look back. But know this, your wolf is already mine. You can lock this door, you can barricade it with every piece of furniture in this room, but you will feel the burn. The longer you deny me, the more it will hurt. We are inevitable. The door clicked shut behind him. Then, the heavy thud of a lock turning from the outside. Aurora didn't wait. She scrambled off the bed, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She dragged a heavy oak vanity across the floor, the wood screeching against the stone, and slammed it against the door. Then a chair, then a heavy trunk. She built a fortress against him. Only when she was sure nothing could get in did she collapse onto the rug. But Damon was right. The moment the adrenaline faded, the pain began. It started as a dull ache in her chest, a hollowness where he should be. Then, her skin began to prickle, a phantom burning that grew hotter with every second they were separated. Her wolf whined in the back of her mind, scratching at the mental walls, begging to be let out, begging for the alpha. Aurora curled into a ball, clutching her knife, and prepared to survive the longest night of her life. Chapter 4. The sun rose like a judgment, piercing through the heavy velvet curtains and stabbing Aurora in the eyes. She hadn't slept. She lay curled on the rug by the barricaded door, her body stiff, her skin feeling as though it had been rubbed with sandpaper. The physical ache of the ignored bond was a constant, throbbing migraine that encompassed her entire body. She stood up, swaying slightly. The room was silent. No one had tried to enter. Had he given up? Aurora pushed the heavy furniture aside, her muscles protesting the effort. She tried the door handle. It turned. Unlocked. Cautiously, she peered into the hallway. Empty. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes. Hunger, sharp and demanding, clawed at her stomach. Her wolf needed fuel to keep fighting the bond. Gripping her dagger, now concealed in the folds of her ruined dress, she crept down the hallway toward the scent of roasted meat and coffee. She found him in the solar, a sun-drenched room with glass walls overlooking the sprawling capital city. King Damon sat at a small round table, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking infuriatingly refreshed. He was reading a stack of parchment, a cup of coffee steaming in his hand. He didn't look up as she entered. There is fruit and cured ham. Sit. Aurora stayed by the doorway, her hand hovering near her hip. I'm not hungry. Lying to your king is treason, Damon said lazily, turning a page. And lying to your mate is futile. I can hear your stomach growling from here. Aurora gritted her teeth and marched to the table, snatching a roll of bread. She didn't sit. I want to leave. I rejected you. By the old laws, you have to let me go. Damon finally looked up. His eyes were clear gold, devoid of the fatigue she felt. The old laws apply to wolves, Aurora. I am the king. I write the laws. He picked up a piece of parchment from the stack and slid it across the mahogany table toward her. It was stamped with the royal seal, a royal wolf in red wax. What is this? She asked, eyeing the paper like it was a viper. A decree, Damon said, taking a sip of his coffee. Effective immediately, the tax on the Northern Territories, your pack, is set to double, and the conscription age for your young males will be lowered to 16. They will be sent to the border wars. Aurora felt the blood drain from her face. You can't do that. My people are already starving. This will kill them. It is harsh, Damon agreed, his voice dangerously smooth. But a king must fund his armies. Unless... He trailed off, leaning back in his chair and watching her with the gaze of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. Unless what? Aurora whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. Unless I had a reason to be benevolent, Damon said. A queen could advocate for her people. A queen could ask her king for a favor, and he would grant it. But you are not my queen, are you, Aurora? You are just a guest who wants to leave. He stood up, towering over her, and the ultimatum hung in the air between them, sharp and cruel. He wasn't just keeping her prisoner. He was holding her entire pack hostage. Chapter 5. The parchment crinkled under Aurora's grip as she slammed it back onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the sun-drenched solar, but King Damon didn't flinch. He watched her with that maddening, predatory calm, his golden eyes tracking the rapid rise and fall of her chest. The threat was clear. Submit to the bond, or watch her pack bleed dry under the weight of his taxes and war conscription. You are a tyrant, Aurora breathed, the words trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. You would punish innocent families, children, just because I won't warm your bed? I am a king ensuring the stability of his realm, Damon corrected, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling through the table and into her fingertips. A kingdom divided cannot stand. I need a queen, Aurora, not a prisoner, not a martyr, a partner. He stood up, rounding the table with a slow, deliberate grace. Aurora backed away until her hips hit the windowsill, trapping her. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of two powerful auras colliding. The mate bond flared to life, a desperate, clawing hunger that wanted her to close the distance, to bury her face in his neck and inhale the scent of cedar and rain. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, using the pain to anchor herself. I will never be your partner, she spat. You burned my home. I ended a rebellion, Damon countered, stopping inches from her. He placed a hand on the window frame beside her head, boxing her in, though he didn't touch her. But perhaps we can reach a compromise. Aurora looked up, her eyes narrowing. What kind of compromise? Damon leaned down, his face so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Give me 30 days. 30 days to live in this castle as my queen. You will attend court, you will dine with me, and you will not lock your door, though I swear I will not enter your bed unless you invite me. You will give this bond and me a fair chance. And if I refuse?
Then the decree stands. The taxes double tomorrow.
Aurora swallowed hard. She hated him. She hated that his scent made her knees weak. But she loved her people more. And if I agree? What happens after 30 days?
If, after 30 days, you still wish to leave,
Damon said, his voice unusually soft,
I will reject the bond myself. I will annul the marriage, lower the taxes for your pack, and let you go. You have my word as Alpha.
It was a gamble, a dangerous one. 30 days of fighting the biological imperative to submit to him. 30 days of pretending to be the wife of a murderer. But it was the only way to save her pack without losing her soul. Fine, Aurora whispered, lifting her chin defiantly. 30 days, but don't expect me to make it easy, Damon. I will count every second until I am free of you. Damon's lips curled into a slow, dark smile, triumph flashing in his eyes.
I expect nothing less, little wolf. The clock starts now.
Chapter 6. The grand ballroom was a sea of velvet, silk, and glittering jewels, a stark contrast to the battlefield of emotions raging inside Aurora. 3 days had passed since she accepted the wager, and this was her first test, the High Council banquet. She felt like an imposter in the midnight blue gown Damon had provided. It clung to her curves like a second skin, the back open to expose the scar on her shoulder blade, a souvenir from the night her village burned. She stood by Damon's side near the throne, her spine stiff. His hand rested on the small of her back, a point of contact that burned through the silk. Every time his thumb brushed against her spine, a jolt of pleasure shot through her, making it nearly impossible to focus on the boring political chatter of the visiting alphos.
Relax,
Damon murmured, leaning down so his breath ghosted over her ear.
You look like you're waiting for an execution.
I am, she muttered out of the side of her mouth. Mine. Before Damon could respond, a boisterous laugh cut through the noise. Alpha Grayson, a bear of a man from the Western clans, pushed his way to the front of the circle. He smelled of stale wine and unwashed fur. His eyes raked over Aurora with open disrespect.
So, this is the northern stray I've heard about,
Grayson sneered, swirling his goblet.
Pretty thing. Shame about the bloodline. I heard her father was a traitor who begged for his life before he burned.
The room went deathly silent. Aurora froze, the insult slashing through her composure like a knife. She opened her mouth to retort, to defend her father's memory, but the temperature in the room plummeted. A low, vibrating growl ripped through the air, a sound so deep it rattled the crystal glasses on the trays. Damon didn't shout. He didn't move fast. He simply took one step forward, placing himself between Aurora and Grayson. His golden eyes were gone, replaced by the pitch-black void of his wolf. The power rolling off him was suffocating, forcing the nearby wolves to drop to their knees in instinctive submission. Speak of her father again, Damon said, his voice a calm, lethal whisper that carried to every corner of the silent hall. And I will tear your tongue from your throat and feed it to the crows. Grayson paled, stepping back, his arrogance evaporating instantly. My king, I meant no— Apologize to your queen, Damon commanded. The alpha voice slammed into the room, a physical weight that forced Grayson's head down. I apologize, my queen, the alpha stammered, terrified. Damon turned his back on the man, dismissing him as if he were nothing. He looked at Aurora, the black fading from his eyes, returning to gold. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, trembling slightly with the effort of restraining his violence. Are you all right? He asked, ignoring the hundreds of eyes watching them. Aurora stared at him, bewildered. He had defended her. He had defended the memory of the man he killed. The confusion swirled in her chest, mixing with the adrenaline and the bond. For the first time, she didn't pull away. "I'm fine," she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Good," Damon said. "Then dance with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled her into the center of the floor as the music started, and as his arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard chest, Aurora realized with a jolt of terror that she felt safe. For the first time in 5 years, in the arms of her enemy, she felt safe. Chapter 7. The fire was everywhere. It roared like a living beast, consuming the timber of the great hall, eating the banners of her pack. The smoke was thick, choking her, stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her face. Through the haze, she saw him, her father, Beta Conan, on his knees in the town square. A figure loomed over him, a sword raised high. The blade fell. "No!" Aurora screamed, bolting upright in bed. Her chest was heaving, her nightgown soaked in cold sweat. The darkness of the royal suite pressed in on her, suffocating and heavy. She scrambled backward, tangling in the silk sheets, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The door to her chamber burst open. Aurora flinched, expecting an assassin, but it was Damon. He was shirtless, wearing only loose sleeping trousers, his hair messy as if he had run his hands through it a dozen times. He scanned the room in a split second, eyes glowing, claws extended. When he saw no intruder, his gaze landed on her, huddled and trembling against the headboard. "Aurora?" The growl left his voice, replaced by urgent concern. He retracted his claws and crossed the room in 3 long strides. He sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for her, then hesitating, remembering their deal. But Aurora was too shaken to care about boundaries. She was still smelling the smoke, still seeing the blood. She buried her face in her hands, trying to steady her breathing. "It was the fire," she choked out. "The night you came." Damon went still. Slowly, carefully, he placed a hand on her shoulder. The heat of his skin seeped through her thin nightgown, grounding her, pulling her out of the memory. The night the northern pack fell. "You killed him," she whispered into her hands, the accusation weak. "I saw the sword." "You saw a sword fall," Damon said quietly. His thumb rubbed circles on her shoulder, a soothing, rhythmic motion. "But the smoke was thick that night, Aurora. The wind was howling." Aurora lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed and confused. "What are you saying?" Damon looked away, staring into the shadows of the room. His jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "I'm saying that war is chaotic, and sometimes the history written by the survivors isn't the whole truth." "Don't play riddles with me," she snapped, pulling away from his touch. "You were there. You led the charge." "I did," Damon admitted, turning back to look her in the eye. His expression was guarded, masking something deep and painful. "I ordered the attack, but I did not order the fire. The fire, that was not my doing. And your father? When I found him, he was already dying." Aurora stared at him, the world tilting on its axis. "You're lying. You're trying to manipulate me." "Believe what you want," Damon said, standing up. The distance between them suddenly felt vast and cold. "But ask yourself, Aurora, why would I burn a city I intended to conquer? Why destroy the resources I needed?" He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. "Get some sleep. We have training in the morning. If you're going to be my queen, you need to learn how to defend yourself from more than just bad dreams." He left, closing the door softly. Aurora sat alone in the dark, the warmth of his hand still lingering on her shoulder. And for the first time, a crack of doubt formed in the foundation of her hatred. Chapter 8. The crack of striking wood echoed across the training grounds. Aurora spun, her practice staff a blur, striking the heavy training dummy with a vicious overhead swing. Dust flew from the impact. She grunted with the effort, pivoting on her heel to deliver a side kick that snapped the dummy's wooden arm clean off. It had been 2 days since the nightmare. 2 days since Damon had planted the seed of doubt in her mind. She needed to hit something. She needed to stop thinking about his eyes, his touch, and the confusing possibility that her entire life's mission was based on a lie. "Your form is sloppy," a voice drawled from the sidelines. Aurora froze, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Damon was leaning against the fence, arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing training leathers that hugged his muscular frame, looking unfairly attractive in the morning light. "I didn't ask for a critique," Aurora snapped, turning to face him. She was breathing hard, her tank top clinging to her skin. Damon pushed off the fence and unlatched the gate, stepping into the ring. He moved with that fluid, predatory grace that always set her teeth on edge. He picked up a quarterstaff from the rack, testing its weight. "You're fighting with anger," he said calmly, circling her. "Anger makes you strong, but it also makes you predictable. You're swinging to kill, not to win." "With you, they are the same thing," Aurora retorted, shifting her grip on her staff. Damon smirked. "Prove it." He lunged. It wasn't a real attack, just a test. Aurora parried, the wood clacking loudly. She countered with a jab to his ribs, but he sidestepped effortlessly, using his staff to sweep her legs. She jumped over the sweep, spinning to strike his head. He blocked it, the impact vibrating up her arms. They moved faster, the dance of combat taking over. Strike, block, parry, kick. For a few minutes, they were perfectly matched. Aurora was fast, fueled by rage, but Damon was stronger, more experienced. He was toying with her, pushing her buttons. "Is that all you have?" he taunted, blocking a flurry of blows. "I thought northern wolves had bite." With a snarl, Aurora feinted left, then dropped to her knees, driving her staff into his stomach. It connected with a satisfying thud. Damon grunted, doubling over slightly. Seizing the moment, she tackled him. It was a mistake. Damon caught her midair, his arms wrapping around her waist. They went down together, rolling in the dirt. Aurora ended up on top, straddling his hips, her forearm pressed against his throat, pinning him to the ground. "Got you," she panted, her hair falling like a curtain around their faces. But Damon wasn't fighting back. He lay beneath her, his chest heaving, his hands resting on her hips. The playful energy of the spar evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. The mate bond roared to life, fueled by the adrenaline and the friction of their bodies. Aurora froze. She could feel the hardness of his muscles beneath her. She could smell the musk of his sweat and the cedar of his scent. Her heart hammered against her ribs, echoing the rapid thud of his own heart beneath her hand. Damon stared up at her, his eyes darkening to molten gold. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You have me," he whispered, his voice rough. "Now what are you going to do with me?" Aurora's breath hitched. Her body screamed at her to lean down, to close the inches between them and taste him. Her grip on his throat loosened, her fingers curling into the collar of his shirt instead. She leaned in, drawn by a magnetic force she couldn't control. Damon's hands tightened on her hips, pulling her down. "Your Majesty!" The shout from the gate shattered the moment like glass. Aurora scrambled off him, stumbling back and nearly tripping over her own feet. Damon sat up, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. Beta Theron stood at the gate, looking breathless and pale. "My king, we have a problem at the border. A patrol has gone missing." Damon stood up, dusting off his leathers, the mask of the king slamming back into place. But before he turned to leave, he cast one last, burning look at Aurora. "We aren't finished," he promised. And looking at the hunger in his eyes, Aurora knew he wasn't talking about the training. Chapter 9. Dust motes danced in the sliver of moonlight that cut through the towering shelves of the Royal Archives. Aurora torment as she picked the lock of the restricted section. It had taken her 3 hours to dodge the night patrol, slipping through shadows like a ghost, driven by the gnawing doubt Damon had planted in her mind during the nightmare. "I did not order the fire." The words had replayed in her head on a loop, a maddening refrain that threatened to unravel 5 years of hatred. She needed proof. She needed to see the war orders with her own eyes. The lock clicked. The heavy iron gate swung open with a groan that sounded like a scream in the silence. Aurora slipped inside, her eyes scanning the labeled crates. Year of the Red War, Northern Conquests. She found the scroll case buried under a stack of tax ledgers. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unrolled the brittle parchment. It was the official battle plan for the siege of her village. She scanned the tactical drawings, the troop movements, and then, at the bottom, the orders for the aftermath. Primary objective: secure the Alpha bloodline. Do not engage civilians. Preserve the infrastructure. Aurora blinked, rereading the line. Preserve the infrastructure. That meant no fire, no burning. Her eyes frantically scanned the margin notes. There, scrawled in a frantic, jagged hand, was a counter order. Burn it. Leave no hiding spots for the rebels. M. M. The initial struck her like a physical blow. Not D for Damon. M. "Searching for bedtime reading, Your Highness?" Aurora spun around, the scroll slipping from her numb fingers. Beta Theron stood in the doorway of the cage, his silhouette blocking the only exit. He wasn't smiling. The flickering torch in the hallway cast long, skeletal shadows across his face. "This order," Aurora whispered, her voice shaking. "It wasn't the king. It was you. You were the commander of the vanguard. You ordered the fire." Theron stepped into the cage, closing the distance slowly. "War is messy, Aurora. Damon, he was young, too soft. He wanted a clean victory. But you cannot conquer a people who still have hope. I did what was necessary to break them." "You killed my father," she realized, the horror rising in her throat like bile. "He was your friend. You grew up together." "He chose the wrong side," Theron said coldly. He reached out, snatching the scroll from the floor. "And you are dangerously close to doing the same. Damon is weak. He is obsessed with you. He lets a conquered pup wander his halls, question his authority. Do you think this forgery will save you?" "It's not a forgery," Aurora snapped, backing away until she hit the bookshelf. "It is if I say it is," Theron hissed, leaning in close. "Who will the council believe? The loyal Beta who has served the crown for 30 years? Or the enemy bride trying to sow discord? Go back to bed, little wolf, before you find something that gets you killed." Chapter 10. Thunder rattled the stained glass windows of the West Wing, mirroring the tempest raging inside Aurora's veins. It was the 15th day of the wager, and the physical toll of the uncompleted bond was becoming unbearable. Her skin felt too tight for her body, every nerve ending exposed and raw. The air in the castle felt stifling, hot enough to blister, though the servants were tending to roaring fires to combat the storm's chill. She couldn't stay in her room. The walls were closing in. She needed air. She needed cold. Aurora stumbled down the corridor, her hand trailing along the stone wall for balance. Her vision blurred at the edges. She wasn't in heat, not fully, but the proximity to Damon, combined with the emotional turmoil of Theron's betrayal, had triggered a biological fever. Her wolf was clawing at the surface, desperate for the one thing that would soothe the burn. She turned the corner and collided with a wall of solid muscle. Strong hands gripped her upper arms to steady her. The scent hit her instantly. Cedar, rain, and raw power. It was like a bucket of ice water on a burn, relief so intense she almost sobbed. "Aurora?" Damon's voice was rough, laced with concern. She looked up. He was soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his coat onto the stone floor. He had just come in from the storm. I can't breathe," she gasped, her hands instinctively clutching the lapels of his wet coat, pulling him closer. "It burns, Damon." Damon froze. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gold iris until his eyes were black pools of instinct. He could smell it. He could smell her need, her pain. His grip on her arms tightened, pulling her flesh against him. The damp cold of his clothes seeped through her thin dress, and she leaned into it, a moan escaping her lips. "The bond," he muttered, his voice a low growl that vibrated against her chest. "It's hitting you." "Make it stop," she whispered, not knowing what she was asking for, only knowing that the space between them was torture. Damon lowered his head, his nose brushing the sensitive skin of her neck. He inhaled deeply, a shudder racking his massive frame. For a second, he pressed his hips against hers, and Aurora felt the hardness of his desire, the sheer restrained violence of his need. If he took her now, right here in the hallway, she wouldn't stop him. She would welcome it. But then he pulled back. It took every ounce of his strength. Damon wrenched himself away, his chest heaving, his hands shaking as he let her go. He stepped back, putting 2 feet of agonizing distance between them. "Not like this," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel. "I won't take you because of a fever, Aurora. I won't have you wake up tomorrow hating me for taking advantage of your biology." He turned his back to her, gripping the stone windowsill until his knuckles turned white. "Go back to your room. Lock the door, or I will break my oath." Chapter 11. The great hall was a cacophony of laughter and clinking silverware. It was the festival of the moon, a night where the pack celebrated unity and strength. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted boars and casks of wine. Aurora sat at the high table beside Damon, her spine rigid. She hadn't spoken to him since the night in the hallway, the humiliation of her near surrender sitting heavy in her stomach. But her eyes weren't on Damon. They were on Theron. The beta sat 3 seats down, playing the role of the jovial advisor, pouring wine for the visiting dignitaries. He looked relaxed, too relaxed for a man who had threatened the queen in the archives. Every time his gaze flicked toward Damon, a small, tight smile played on his lips. "A toast!" Theron bellowed, standing up and raising a golden chalice. The hall quieted. "To our king! May his reign be long, and his enemies short-lived." The crowd cheered. Theron handed the chalice to Damon. Damon took it, nodding his thanks. He stood up to address his people, lifting the cup to his lips. Aurora caught the scent instantly. It cut through the smell of roasted meat and wine, a sharp, metallic tang mixed with the sickly sweetness of crushed almonds. Wolfsbane, highly concentrated. "Damon, no!" The scream tore from her throat before she even registered moving. Aurora launched herself from her chair, diving across the space between them. Her hand struck the golden chalice just as it touched Damon's lips. The cup flew from his hand, spinning through the air. It hit the stone floor with a clang, splashing the dark red wine across the dais. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Damon stared at her, his arm still raised, frozen in shock. Wine splattered his white shirt like blood. He looked from the spilled wine to Aurora, who was panting, her chest heaving, standing between him and the table. "Are you mad?" a guard shouted, stepping forward with a spear. "Look!" Aurora pointed at the floor. Where the wine had pooled on the stone, it was sizzling. White foam bubbled up from the liquid, eating into the rock. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Damon's eyes widened. He looked at the sizzling poison, then at Aurora. The realization hit him. She had just saved his life. The skepticism, the wariness, it all vanished, replaced by a look of raw awe. He reached out for her. "Aurora." "Seize her!" Theron's voice boomed, shattering the moment. Before Damon could touch her, 4 guards rushed the dais, grabbing Aurora's arms. "What is the meaning of this?" Damon roared, his alpha power flaring, forcing the guards to hesitate. "She poisoned the cup!" Theron yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Aurora. "I saw her slip something into it when I poured. She tried to kill the king and make it look like an accident." "Liar!" Aurora screamed, struggling against the guards. "It was you! I smelled it!" "Search her!" Theron commanded. A guard ripped the small pouch from Aurora's belt, the one she used for herbs to help her sleep. He upended it onto the table. Dried lavender fell out, followed by a small glass vial containing a dark, viscous purple liquid. Aurora stared at the vial in horror. She had never seen it before in her life. Chapter 12. "Liquid nightshade," the royal healer whispered, picking up the vial with a trembling hand. "1 drop is enough to kill a lichen in seconds." The evidence was damning. The hall erupted into chaos, shouts of "traitor" and "assassin" bouncing off the stone walls. Damon stood in the center of the storm, motionless. He looked at the vial, then at Theron, and finally at Aurora. His face was pale, his golden eyes filled with a conflict so violent it looked like physical pain. "Damon, please," Aurora begged, the guards twisting her arms behind her back. "I didn't do this. He planted it. Theron planted it." "She has been conspiring against you since she arrived," Theron shouted over the crowd, stepping closer to the king. "We found her in the archives trying to steal war records. She is a spy. She is an assassin. The law is clear, my king. The punishment for regicide is death." "Silence!" Damon bellowed. The command slammed into the room, silencing every wolf instantly. He walked up to Aurora. He was close enough that she could see the betrayal warring with the instinct to protect her. He reached out, gripping her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice low, desperate. "Tell me the truth, Aurora. Did you try to kill me?" "No," she wept, tears spilling over. "I saved you. Why would I knock the cup from your hand if I wanted you dead?" "To garner trust, to make yourself the hero," Theron interjected. Damon didn't look at Theron. He searched Aurora's eyes, looking for the lie. He didn't find one. But the
The vial was real. And as king, he couldn't ignore evidence in front of hundreds of witnesses.
He couldn't appear weak. He released her chin, his hand dropping to his side. He looked older, tired.
I cannot ignore the law, Damon said, his voice hollow. But I will not execute my mate without a trial.
Damon, Aurora whispered, her heart shattering.
Take her to the tower, Damon ordered the guards, turning his back on her. Lock her in the high cell, double guard, no one enters, no one leaves.
You're making a mistake, Aurora screamed as the guards dragged her backward. He's going to kill you! Damon, listen to me! Theron watched with a smug expression as she was hauled away. Damon stood like a statue, staring at the sizzling stain on the floor, the bond screaming in his chest that he had just made a catastrophic error. The heavy doors of the great hall slammed shut, cutting off her screams, leaving the king alone in a room full of people, trapped in a web of lies he couldn't yet see. Chapter 13. The stone floor of the high tower cell was freezing, sucking the warmth straight out of Aurora's bones. But the chill was nothing compared to the ice in her veins. She paced the small circular room, her bare feet silent on the granite. 3 hours. She had been locked up for 3 hours. From her narrow window, high above the castle grounds, she could see the moon rising, a blood-red crescent that promised violence. Down below, the castle was quiet. Too quiet. Damon had doubled the guard, just as he promised, but he had made a fatal error. He had let Theron choose the roster. A heavy scrape of iron against stone drew her attention to the heavy oak door. The slot slid open. A pair of eyes peered in, not the stoic gaze of a royal guard, but the shifty, nervous look of a mercenary.
Quiet in there, witch, the guard sneered. Enjoy the view. It'll be your last sunrise.
Theron isn't going to wait for a trial, is he? Aurora asked, stopping her pacing. She walked to the door, her voice calm, deceptively soft. He needs me dead before I can testify about the poison.
The guard laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Smart girl. Too bad smarts don't stop a blade. The Alpha King is busy mourning his betrayal in the solar. By the time he comes down here, you'll be a tragic suicide.
The slot slammed shut. The sound of a key turning in the lock followed. Aurora didn't retreat. She backed up 3 paces, her muscles coiling. She didn't have her dagger. She didn't have her armor. But she had something Theron had forgotten about. Desperation. And she had the blood of an alpha line he had failed to extinguish. The door swung open. The guard stepped in, a serrated knife already in his hand, a cruel grin on his face. He expected a cowering girl. He got a whirlwind. Aurora launched herself before he cleared the threshold. She didn't go for the weapon. She went for the throat. Her fingers, hardened by years of survival, clamped onto his windpipe. The guard gagged, his eyes bulging, swinging the knife wildly. The blade sliced into her forearm, a line of hot fire, but Aurora didn't let go. She slammed his head back against the stone archway with a sickening crunch. He crumpled like a sack of grain. Aurora ignored the blood dripping from her arm. She snatched the knife from his limp hand and the keys from his belt. She stepped out into the corridor, stepping over the body of the second guard who had been silently neutralized by the first. Theron was cleaning up loose ends already. She ran to the spiral staircase, but stopped at the window on the landing. A flicker of movement in the distant tree line caught her eye. It wasn't the wind. Hundreds of yellow eyes reflected the moonlight. Shadows were detaching themselves from the forest, moving toward the castle walls with silent, deadly coordination. Rogues. An entire army of them. Damon, she whispered, terror gripping her heart. Theron hadn't just framed her. He had opened the gates. The alarm bells didn't ring until the first wave of rogues breached the courtyard. By then, the slaughter had already begun. Damon burst from the great keep, his sword drawn, a roar of pure fury ripping from his throat. He was a blur of violence, cutting down 2 rogues before his feet even hit the cobblestones. But he was fighting a losing battle. The castle guards were confused, disorganized, their chain of command shattered by Theron's treachery. "Form up!" Damon bellowed, decapitating a massive gray wolf that lunged for his throat. "Protect the inner sanctum!" He spun, parrying a blow from a rogue armed with a silver-tipped spear. The metal sizzled against his blade. Damon kicked the attacker away, but 3 more took his place. He was surrounded. Sweat and blood matted his hair, and his movements were a fraction too slow. The poison from the cup hadn't killed him, but the fumes alone had weakened him. "Give up, Damon!" Theron's voice boomed from the ramparts above. The traitor Beta stood safely on the wall, looking down like a god watching ants burn. "The Northern Alliance is here to reclaim what is theirs. Surrender, and I will make your death quick." "I will mount your head on a spike," Damon roared back, shifting into his massive black wolf form. He tore through the circle of rogues, a juggernaut of muscle and teeth, desperate to reach the stairs, to reach the tower. Aurora. He had left her defenseless. A massive rogue, twice the size of a normal wolf, tackled Damon from the flank, sinking teeth into his shoulder. Damon howled in pain, stumbling. Another rogue clamped onto his hind leg. They were dragging him down. "I'm sorry, Aurora," he thought, his vision swimming as the mass of fur and teeth overwhelmed him. Then, a white streak shot across the courtyard. It wasn't a guard. It was a phantom. A white wolf, smaller than the males, but moving with a lethal, fluid grace, launched herself from the balcony of the mess hall. She landed squarely on the back of the rogue, biting Damon's neck. With a savage snarl, Aurora tore the rogue's throat out in one clean bite. Damon scrambled to his feet, shaking off the other attacker. He stared at the white wolf. Her fur was stained with blood that wasn't hers, her blue eyes blazing with a ferocity that matched his own. "Aurora?" The bond snapped between them, clearer and stronger than ever before. "Fight now. Talk later." Her voice echoed in his head, sharp and commanding. She didn't run. She stood back to back with him, snarling at the encircling army. The sight of the Alpha King and his white wolf fighting in perfect synchronization sent a ripple of fear through the rogue ranks. They moved as one entity. He was the hammer, she was the blade. Theron saw the tide turning. His face twisted in a snarl. He grabbed a crossbow from a dead guard on the wall. He didn't aim for Damon. He aimed for the smaller, faster white wolf. "Die, you witch!" The bolt whistled through the air. Damon heard it. The alpha instinct, faster than thought, took over. He threw his massive body in front of Aurora, taking the bolt deep into his chest. Chapter 15. The roar that tore from Aurora's throat stopped the battle. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was a scream of pure, shattered soul. Damon collapsed, shifting back into his human form as he hit the ground. The bolt was buried deep, perilously close to his heart. The fletching was black, soaked in concentrated wolfsbane. "No, no, no!" Aurora shift, disregarding her nudity, disregarding the war raging around them. She fell to her knees in the mud, her hands hovering over the wound. The black veins were already spreading across his chest, the poison racing to stop his heart. The rogues hesitated, sensing the alpha's fall, circling closer like vultures. The loyal guards formed a desperate ring around their fallen king and his mate, clashing steel against claws to buy them seconds. Damon coughed, blood bubbling past his lips. His hand reached up, trembling, to cup Aurora's cheek. His skin was already turning gray. "Run," he wheezed. "Aurora, run." "Shut up," she sobbed, pressing her forehead against his. "I am not leaving you. I am not running." "The poison," Damon gasped, his eyes rolling back. "Too strong." "Not for this," Aurora whispered. She knew the old legends. The only thing stronger than wolfsbane, the only thing that could burn out the poison and knit a shattered heart, was the completion of the true mate bond. It required a transfer of life force so potent it could kill a weaker wolf. She didn't hesitate. "I accept you," Aurora said, her voice ringing with the power of the ancient queens. "I, Aurora Conan, accept you, Damon Gonzalo, as my mate. I claim your life as mine. I claim your pain as mine." She leaned down and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a kiss of romance. It was a seal. At the same time, she sank her teeth into the junction of his neck and shoulder, marking him. The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave of golden light exploded from them, knocking the nearest rogues off their feet. Aurora gasped as she felt the poison flood into her own system, filtered through the bond, diluted by her strength, and burned away by the sheer power of their combined souls. It felt like dying. It felt like being born. Damon's back arched off the cobblestones. His eyes flew open, glowing not just gold, but a blinding, radiant white. The bolt in his chest was pushed out by rapidly healing flesh, clattering to the ground. The power surge didn't stop. It rolled outward, hitting every wolf in the courtyard. The rogues fell to their knees, crushed by the weight of a dual alpha command. Damon sat up, gasping for air, the wound on his chest now nothing but a faint silver scar. He looked at Aurora, who was swaying, exhausted, drained of nearly everything she had. He caught her before she fell, pulling her into his lap, burying his face in her neck where she had marked him. "Mine," he growled, the sound echoing like thunder. "Yours," she whispered, and let the darkness take her. Chapter 16. The dungeons of the Gonzalo castle were damp, smelling of mold and despair. But for Beta Theron, they smelled of failure. He was chained to the wall in the deepest cell, stripped of his rank, his fine clothes, and his dignity. The heavy iron door creaked open. Theron looked up, squinting against the torchlight. King Damon stood there, looking more powerful than he ever had before. The bond had settled, and it had changed him. He was no longer just a king. He was a force of nature. Beside him stood Aurora. She wore a simple dress, but she wore it like armor. The mark on her neck, Damon's mark, was visible, a warning to anyone who dared challenge her. "Come to gloat?" Theron spat. Blood from a broken tooth spraying the floor. "Come to finish it," Damon said quietly. "I demand a trial," Theron sneered, rattling his chains. "The council will want to hear how I tried to liberate the North from a tyrant." "The council has seen the records," Aurora said, stepping forward. Her voice was cold, devoid of the pity she once might have felt. "They know you ordered the fires. They know you sold our people to the rogues. There will be no trial, Theron. Only a sentence." Damon drew his sword. The sound of steel was the only warning. Theron's eyes widened. "Wait, you don't understand. I didn't do it for myself. I had to. He made me." Damon paused, the blade hovering inches from Theron's neck. "He? Who is he?" Theron began to laugh, a high, hysterical sound that bordered on madness. "You think you won? You think killing me ends this?
I was just the gatekeeper. The rogues were just the distraction. Speak, Damon commanded, the alpha voice slamming into Theron. The vampire lord, Valerius, Theron gasped, the compulsion forcing the truth out of his throat. He promised me the northern throne if I weakened your defenses. He wants the land, Damon. He wants the Lycan bloodlines. And he is already here. Aurora and Damon exchanged a look. Valerius. The name was a myth,
A bedtime story told to scare pups. The oldest, cruelest creature of the night who had vanished centuries ago. Where? Aurora demanded. Where is he? Theron grinned, blood coating his teeth. He's not outside the walls, my queen. He's already inside. He wears a face you trust. He walks in your court. And now that you've bonded, now that your power is peaked, he's going to feast. Before they could ask another question, Theron bit down hard. A crunch of glass, a suicide capsule hidden in a false tooth. He convulsed once, violent and sharp, and then went limp, the hysterical smile still frozen on his face. Damon cursed, sheathing his sword. He turned to Aurora, grabbing her hand. The victory of the battle, the joy of the bond, suddenly felt fragile. We need to lock down the castle, Damon said, his eyes scanning the shadows of the dungeon as if the enemy were already there. No one leaves. No one enters. Aurora looked at the dead traitor, a chill settling over her that had nothing to do with the dungeon air. The wager was over. She had won her freedom, and she had chosen to stay. But as she squeezed Damon's hand, she realized the war hadn't ended. It had just begun. Who do we trust? She whispered. Damon looked at her, the golden light in his eyes dimming to a serious, deadly resolve. Right now, only each other. Chapter 17. The heavy iron portcullis slammed into the cobblestones with a finality that shook the foundations of the Gonzalo fortress. Torches flickered along the battlements as the royal guard, now purged of anyone even remotely connected to Theron's roster, took their positions. The castle was no longer a home. It was a prison designed to keep a monster inside. Damon paced the length of the war room, his boots echoing sharply against the stone. He hadn't washed the blood from his hands yet. Theron's blood, rogue blood, and his own. The golden light in his eyes was unstable, flickering with the paranoia that Theron's final words had ignited. He wears a face you trust. Sit down, Damon, Aurora said quietly from the head of the table. She was tracing the map of the northern territories with a finger, but her mind was elsewhere. You're scaring the council. Good, Damon snarled, spinning around to face the 5 remaining elders who sat huddled at the far end of the table. They should be scared. We've a leech in our walls. A creature that has been extinct for 400 years is apparently walking our halls, and not one of you smelled him. Sire, Elder Thomas, a frail wolf with clouded eyes, spoke up, his voice trembling. Vampires of Valerius's lineage. They are masters of glamour. They can mask their scent. They can cloud the mind. We would not know he was here until his fangs were in our throats. Then what use are you? Damon slammed his hands onto the table, the wood groaning under his strength. If you cannot smell the enemy, you are liabilities. Aurora stood up, placing a calming hand on Damon's forearm. The spark of the bond jumped between them, grounding him. Tearing apart our own leadership is exactly what Valerius wants, she said, her voice steel. He wants chaos. He wants us to turn on each other so he can pick us off one by one. She turned to the elders. Go to your quarters. Bar your doors. Do not open them for anyone, not even the king. If you see anything suspicious, burn white sage in your hearths. We will see the smoke." The elders scrambled to obey, fleeing the room like frightened rabbits. When the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving them alone, Damon slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know who to trust, Aurora. Theron was right. It could be anyone. The captain of the guard, the head cook, Silas the healer." "We trust the bond," Aurora said, moving to stand between his knees. She ran her fingers through his hair, scratching lightly at his scalp. "The bond cannot be glamored. If this Valerius tries to impersonate you, I will know. If he impersonates me, you will know." Damon wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach, listening to the steady rhythm of her heart. "I should have killed Theron slower. I should have made him give me a name." "He didn't have a name," Aurora whispered, looking up at the high windows where the moon stared down at them. "He was a pawn. Valerius doesn't give his pawns names. He just gives them orders." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Damon was on his feet in a second, sword drawn. "Who is it?" he bellowed. "It's Silas, my king," came the muffled voice of the royal healer. "I have the autopsy report on Theron. There is something you need to see. It's urgent." Damon looked at Aurora. Silas had been the one to identify the poison. He had saved Damon's life in the Great Hall. Surely he was safe. "Enter," Damon commanded, lowering the sword slightly but keeping his muscles coiled. The door opened. Silas stepped in, clutching a clipboard. He looked pale, sweating profusely. He took 2 steps into the room and stopped. "Well?" Damon barked. "What did you find?" Silas opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a thin line of red appeared across his throat. His eyes widened in shock. The clipboard clattered to the floor. As Aurora and Damon watched in horror, Silas's head slid slowly off his shoulders, hitting the floor with a wet thud. His body collapsed a second later, revealing the empty, dark corridor behind him. There was no one there, just the lingering, chilling sensation of a cold wind where there should be none. And pinned to Silas's back with a silver dagger was a note written on fine parchment. Chapter 18. Damon moved before the body had fully settled, crossing the room in a blur of speed. He grabbed Aurora and shoved her behind him, shielding her with his body as he stared into the empty hallway. His alpha growl rumbled deep in his chest, a warning to the shadows. "Show yourself," he roared. Silence answered him. The corridor was empty. The torches didn't flicker. There was no scent of an intruder, no musk, no sweat, no decay. It was as if death itself had walked in, claimed a life, and vanished into the stone. "He's gone," Aurora whispered, her hand gripping the back of Damon's shirt. She peered around his shoulder at the gruesome scene. "He wanted us to see this." Damon kept his sword raised, backing slowly toward the table, keeping Aurora pinned against the wall. "Close the door." Aurora rushed to the heavy oak door and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt and dragging a heavy iron chair under the handle. Only then did she turn her attention to Silas's body. Damon knelt beside the fallen healer, his face a mask of fury. He reached out and pulled the silver dagger from Silas's back, freeing the parchment. "Don't touch it with your bare skin," Aurora warned, but it was too late. Damon unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphy, written in a dark, rusty substance that was unmistakably dried blood. "The bond is a delicacy," Damon read aloud, his voice dripping with disgust. "I tasted the power flare when you claimed her. Delicious. But raw power is so unrefined. I prefer to let it age. Let the fear marinate the meat. I will be dining in the royal wing tonight. Sleep tight, little wolf. Damon crumpled the note in his fist, the paper turning to ash instantly. It was spelled. He's taunting us, Damon said, standing up. He was here. He was standing right behind Silas, invisible. The royal wing, Aurora repeated, her blood running cold. Damon, that's where the pups are. The nursery for the orphaned pack members. Terror, sharp and immediate, cut through the paranoia. The castle lockdown had trapped everyone inside, including the most vulnerable. Stay here, Damon ordered, turning toward the secret passage behind the tapestry, a shortcut to the nursery. No, Aurora snapped, grabbing a heavy candelabra from the table since she had no other weapon. We stay together. You said it yourself. He can't fool the bond. If we separate, we are vulnerable. Damon hesitated, then nodded once. Stay on my heel. If you see anything at all, you scream. They moved into the secret passage, a narrow stone throat that smelled of dust and old earth. They ran, their footsteps muffled by the gloom. The passage opened out behind a portrait in the hallway leading to the nursery. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Usually there were guards posted at the nursery door. 2 of them. Now the corridor was empty. The torches had been extinguished, leaving the hallway in pitch blackness. Damon's eyes adjusted, the gold glowing like flashlights in the dark. He held up a hand, signaling Aurora to stop. What is it? She breathed, barely audible. The smell, Damon whispered. Copper. Blood. A lot of it. They crept forward, the silence pressing against their ears. As they neared the nursery door, the source of the smell became clear. The 2 guards weren't gone. They were slumped against the wall, appearing to be asleep. But their skin was the color of alabaster, and their necks were torn open, not by wolf teeth, but by surgical, precise punctures. They had been drained dry. But the nursery door was ajar. A soft sound drifted out from the room. It wasn't a scream. It was a hum. A lullaby. Damon and Aurora exchanged a look of pure terror. Someone was inside with the children. Someone was singing to them. Damon kicked the door open, ready to slaughter whatever was inside. The scene froze them both. Sitting in the rocking chair in the center of the room, holding a sleeping toddler in his arms, was a man. He was handsome, with pale skin and dark, laughing eyes. He looked nothing like a monster. He looked like a nobleman. He looked exactly like Lord Sterling, the head of the council, the man Aurora had sent to his room an hour ago. The creature looked up, his eyes flashing red for a brief second before returning to a warm brown. He put a finger to his lips. Shh, the vampire said, smiling with teeth that were far too sharp. The little ones are sleeping. It would be rude to wake them before dinner. He smiled,